Good afternoon. You're listening to My Conscious Dad right here on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS. Today we are going to be talking about enabling parents. And I think first we should kind of distinguish what enabling means.
You know, for me, I think that when we break down the distinction between helping and enabling is really the crux of defining how to, discern what is enabling versus what's helping. I think that, for the most part, as parents, we love our kids so much that we want them to be successful. We want them to achieve, and we want them to develop, and we want them to have wins in their life. And so I think it's just natural as parents that we're going to do whatever we can to help our kids win. And we decide that we're going to help them to the nth degree. And I think that sometimes when we cross those lines, when they're blurred, we start to fall into the enabling, and we take away the opportunity for our kids to really kind of figure out who they are and how confident they are by making their own choices. And so what I want to do is distinguish the difference between helping versus enabling. So helping is more about doing something for someone that he or she is not capable of doing for themselves. So when you notice that somebody either doesn't have the ability, the physical or mental or emotional ability to do something, and you've identified that, then I think it's okay to help them by doing it for them and showing them maybe the first couple of times. But when you have a child that is fully capable and you are oblivious to that or don't realize that or you're not aware of it, enabling is doing something for someone that he or she can do for themselves or should be doing for themselves. And that's, I think, the gray area that we can slide into very easily.
Yeah, and what's the, I guess, kind of tip or trick or and you can answer this at the end after we go over everything, but I guess the one thing that I can imagine parents wondering is, how do I know if they need my help or if I'm just giving them too much?
And I think that that's the purpose of the show today, is really to talk about it and share some experiences and have the listeners identify with things that we go, oh, I do that, or ooh, maybe I know that I shouldn't be doing that and I kind of overlook it and I don't realize how damaging it could be. I believe that enabling can be damaging not only for our kids and their growth, but it's also damaging to us, because later on we're the one that's going to have to pay the price when our kids decide that they're not going to do it anymore because mom or dad always does it for me. I think that's the common mistake that we make as parents, is we want to help our kids so much and we love them so much that when we're helping them, we don't realize that we take away the opportunity for them to do for themselves. There's something to be said about learning how to do for yourself. And so what I'll do is I'm going to start with my own personal experience with my parents. There was a lot of things that my dad said no to me. And as a child, I remember looking back thinking to myself, how selfish of him that he wouldn't do for me when I really felt like I needed him. And my mom was the opposite. My mom, just whatever I asked her for, she probably just stepped up and handled about 98% of all the requests that I had as a teenager. And I think that looking back, my dad was the balance. My dad, for whatever his reasons were, him saying no, kind of it lit a fire inside of me. It was I got to be honest, it was an angry fire, because I thought to myself, how could you turn your back on me like that? But I was too young to recognize that, he wasn't turning his back on me. He knew, I think, in his gut that he didn't want to jump in and save me and ruin the opportunity for me to learn that I am capable to do it for myself. So I'm very grateful now as an adult looking back. And a lot of times I'll tell my clients, if you're willing to sacrifice the instant gratification now of helping your son and daughter and getting the thank you moms and the glory now, later on as a young adult, or hopefully an adult in their 50s or 60s, they can look back and go, hey mom, hey dad, I want to thank you for not giving me everything. It taught me a lot about life. It taught me a lot about me and what I'm capable of creating for myself.
And I think not that you have to, but I would imagine that starting that a lot younger is a little bit easier, because I see adults who are being enabled by their parents, and as soon as their parents stop enabling them, I see these grown adults, 30, 40-year-old people throwing temper tantrums because their mom won't help them anymore.
Yeah, I kind of call it creating a monster. You've created this monster and didn't realize it until the monster starts to awaken and show its and bare its ugly teeth, and then you realize, wow, by that time you've already created the dysfunction. and you've acknowledged it, and you've verified it and validated it to the point where now it's a full-blown habit, and your son or daughter can't, fend for themselves. And a lot of times I use like an example of, falling in love with a cute animal out in the wild, the wilderness. And you bring that a wild animal home, and you baby it, and you feed it, and you bottle feed it, and you do all that. And then at a certain point, when that animal gets really big and you can't take care of it anymore, you now all of a sudden want to take it back to the jungle and let it loose. Do you think that animal is going to survive?
No, he won't be able to fend for himself. And I can see a lot of, I guess as we talk about it, I could imagine a lot of people that in my life could personally identify with it. And every time we start talking about certain topics, I try to see where I relate, or where I could come into play, or where I'm doing these things or being these things. And not that I would consider myself an enabler, but I do consider myself controlling, which they both kind of fall hand in hand. You're explaining enabling, but I'm hearing, I guess, what I want to hear. The things that I identify with, and I hear a controller.
Absolutely. And controlling has a lot to do with it. And, when people say, what do you mean by controlling? Well, there's a possibility that you're trying to control the situation. You're trying to control and have the situation turn out the way you need it to look. A lot of times it could be a selfish act where your son or daughter needs to learn a certain lesson by engaging in whatever circumstance is they're facing, and because you don't want them to go through or suffer or not achieve or accomplish or fail, you get in there and you start to put all of your choices into play, and you start to manipulate the scenarios and the circumstances so that they have a favorable outcome. But a lot of times you got to really ask yourself as a parent, is that really about them, or is it about me? Is it about me not having to deal with the cleanup with them and the nurturing and having them cry and having them beat themselves up, or is it really about them learning and trusting that when they fail, that there's some growth in that. So a lot of it has to do with perspective shifting. But yeah, I definitely think that there's some controlling stuff inside of there. There's you wanting the outcome to look the way you want it to look, rather than surrendering and allowing the outcome to unfold the way it's supposed to for your son and daughter in their journey.
And another good thing about identifying, one, enabling, and two, controlling, especially within yourself, is you can now see when you are being enabled and when someone is trying to control you. Because how cool if your 15-year-olds, as you're helping them with their science project, was like, Mom, back off, this is my homework. Like that would almost be devastating to some parent, and then it could be exciting to another parent. So I guess it just depends on what level of control or what level you need to be needed by your kids.
And when you say that, I think I visualize the conscious parent inside going, girl, good for you. Like, tell your mom what you need to say, and then I can see the unconscious parent, getting offended or getting their feelings hurt or getting upset and getting mad, saying, well, I'm just trying to help you, and not realizing it. So it really comes down to being conscious. You have to really be aware and notice, and ask yourself and check in with yourself and say, how much of what I'm doing for my kids is getting in the way of their development, them learning. And so the picture I like to paint for parents is when your son or daughter is born and they're little babies, it's good enough for you to control the outcome and manage what happens to them, and your job is to really kind of control the scenarios and their environment for them to not hurt themselves, and help them learn to tie their shoe, and if they don't, you tie it for them a couple times. But at a certain point, your job is to slowly replace yourself, because you're the leader for your son or daughter when they're 3 or 4 years old. But at a certain point, your job is to teach them a few times, do it for them, and then slowly start to transition yourself out of being in control of what's going on. Let them start to navigate and take control of the wheel of their own life. And so what commonly happens is the conscious parent starts to realize around 8 or 9 that they don't want to continue to control their kids. So what they do is they start to shift into more of a coaching style. So they ask open-ended questions. They ask their kids how they're going to handle things. They draw out the wisdom from the kids as they shift into more of an advisor or a coaching style parent. But the common parent he's either never taught that, or hasn't realized that or doesn't see the benefits of that, and they stay trying to control their kid and the outcomes that they have in their life, then they wonder why they're bumping heads at 15 or 16 years old. Is because your teenager doesn't want you to control them. They're trying to flap their own wings and realize for themselves how confident and courageous they can be, and there you are in the way trying to manipulate the outcome for them so that you feel better about yourself.
Yeah, I can also see it in certain scenarios, kids who allow their parents or have been put down by their parents in such a way that they don't flap their wings anymore. So you don't have a teen who's fighting with you. You don't have a teen, and you think, oh, I'm the lucky one, but they're actually they don't know that they're being suppressed, or they don't know that there's more for them. They think that box, that lid that you put on top is it, and that's all that they can go.
Yeah, because they can't compare that to anyone else unless they go to their friend's house or their neighbor's house, or they're spending that weekend with their cousin and they watch their aunt with their cousin interacting. Then they start to compare and go, oh, wow. My aunt, Rosie doesn't treat my cousin the same way. Or they can come home and say to the mom, wow, Aunt Rosie's mean. And you go, why? Well, she doesn't help Christina with, doing her chores. And maybe that's a wake-up call for you to go, whoa, maybe I'm doing too much. Maybe I should be doing a little bit like Aunt Rosie and be pulling back and holding you accountable for doing some things for yourself so that you can figure out how to take what you're learning and figure out how to develop that confidence and transfer it into the world. I look at parenting as it's my job while you're in my home is to teach you about consequences. There's actions and consequences, and my job is to enforce that environment so that you learn how to be a capable, responsible young adult that can make decisions for yourself, so that when you finally fly the coop and you're out into the real world, I've set you up to win. I'm not setting you up to win if I'm jumping in and handling all your circumstances and doing things for you. What's going to happen now? If I'm doing your homework all the time and I'm paying bills and apologizing for you and doing everything that you should be learning for yourself, then when you go out into college or go out into the real world, you're going to be struggling, just like that wild animal you put back. You can't fend for yourself. The world is really brutal, and it's going to eat you up if you don't learn how to develop those types of inner tools.
And going back just a little bit, you had said you feel like your job is teaching those consequences, and there's a difference between punishment and consequences. I think punishment is something that you get from your parents, or anyone, but mostly in this situation, your parents, where you're talked down to, or you get grounded or get in trouble. But consequences, they're a little bit more of a, I guess, learning lesson or a life lesson, which I see a lot of value in getting my consequences served to me versus a punishment. And I know that growing up, I would do certain things or want to make certain decisions, and even though you and mom knew that there were going to be some drastic consequences, you still let me do it so I could learn that lesson, instead of punishing me and saying you're grounded if you do that. So you guys would go ahead and let me go get hurt or get whatever that I needed to get from that experience, and it taught me to either never do that again or do it a different way, or however it looks. And that happened a lot. I can think of 4 or 5 different times just right now off the top of my head where I was so mad at you guys for not stopping me. But I also now can see, wow, I wouldn't have listened to them anyways.
It's funny because, in the Hispanic culture, there's some weird things that we do, especially as parents. And one of the things is like, you got your little kid and your kid looks and goes, the stove, hot. And you're like, don't touch it. It'll burn you. And you're like, hot, and you're still reaching. And instead of grabbing your hand, because I can easily grab your hand and go, no, don't touch it, and argue with you. And Hispanics, we're like, all right, go ahead, touch it. And as soon as you touch it, now you burned yourself and you're crying, but you learned that now I know what hot feels like. So I'm not going to touch hot anymore. So, and I believe that some of that is helpful as long as your child doesn't get now 3rd-degree burns and they got to cut the fingers off. But you want to do that in moderations, to where you let the kid for themselves fall and hurt themselves and scrape their knee, and instead of going and picking them up and making them bad and wrong, like, see, I told you not to do that. You pick them up and say, okay, that's what happens. We explained to you earlier that if you do that, this is a possibility. You did it. Now right? Hey, and then you pick up your child and you give them a hug and you comfort them, and then you don't make them bad and wrong for it. You just kind of explain to them, or maybe sometimes you don't even say anything. Sometimes the lesson is so powerful when your mom and dad doesn't say anything after you've been told not to, and you do it anyways. And I hope that as you were growing up, that your mom and I set up and teed up certain scenarios for you and prepped you and gave you some options to say you can go ahead and do that. But what we found is when we did that when we were younger, either we had to pay a price, either were grounded, or and I hope that we at least set that up for you, so that when you did make that decision, when it was time to pay the piper, and we had to stand that line now and enforce those consequences, that you felt, hey, I always think to myself, I hope she's in her room while she's crying because she got punished, that she's sitting there going, hey, it's my fault, I was told not to and I did it anyways. That's always the part of me that is sitting in the back of my mind. And then I'm always asking myself, did I explain it to her? Did I properly give her a heads up, or did I just set her up to fail?
I think for me, I always think of, and we talk about how there's no such thing as really right or wrong parenting, just effective parenting.
That's right.
And one of the things that I always think of as, I guess, my number one is I should get one out of the way. For me, it's support all the time. That's what I love about my family and my parents and everything. But number two is parents, I guess, setting up their child to win. So when you were explaining that story, I was seeing, if I wanted to do something, instead of just getting no, yes, fine, sure, do whatever you want, instead of getting those responses, which are really common in parents, they just say no, or they just say yes, and they have no explanation, and kids are just like, but why, mom, why? And they keep asking, and they just say, because I said so, or whatever. But it's so much more, to me, personally, just out of my own experience, effective if I can hear my dad or my mom say, no, because I've done that before, and this is how it turned out. Go ahead and do it if you want, but you're going to pay the consequences. And if I know that you do it, or I find out you do it, you're going to be grounded, and you're going to pay the other consequences that it comes with, or whatever it looks like in whatever certain situation.
What I'm starting to learn now as an older gentleman and, older parent, hopefully soon becoming a grandfather, they say you get wiser as you get older in the parenting, but I don't know about that. But what I'm realizing is that if I start to just be more honest with you guys, you're going to do something, instead of saying, no, you shouldn't, or giving my opinion. You guys are young adults now. You guys, I feel like I created a great solid foundation for you guys to make your own decisions from. But if I just become more honest and just let you know, hey, these are my fears. I know you're going to Las Vegas and you're going to that one, what's that one party all the kids go to? They go out to the desert and they
EDC.
The EDC. You're giving a thumbs up back there. So, as a parent, your young 20-year-old or 19-year-old or 23-year-olds going out and celebrating and, living life. I think it seems like it's just easier to just be honest and say, hey, I'm afraid that you're going to get hurt, or I'm afraid that something's going to happen to you. And I just feel like I need to say that to you, and that's enough. I don't need to go and say, don't do this, don't do that. And just say, or a lot of times, like, when Mark would go out when he was younger, a lot of times when he would say, hey, I'm going out, I would just say, be smart. Or I would try to remind him, hey, remember, you're a leader, you're not a follower. So I would plant these little seeds and trust that those little seeds would sprout if and when the time came when they were being asked to do something that they didn't want to.
Hey, you know what? We have to take a break, so stay tuned for more of My Conscious Dad right here on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS.